What are you hoping to see from conference?
Well, look, I think the test that everyone's been talking about for the last week is whether or not the government is basically being fiscally responsible. I think there's another test at Conservative Party conference. The government set out in this growth plan, nobody's really paid any attention to it, but a set of reforms to drive growth that are normally not the kind of reforms you hear from the Conservative Party. Immigration reform to make sure we have the skills we need. Planning reform. Very often Conservative councils not supportive of planning reform. Net zero is back in fashion. Onshore wind is back in fashion. Now that's what businesses around the country were quite heartened by. But we are nervous as to whether or not the Conservatives really mean what they say. So I'm hoping this week to hear a little bit more from the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, and in the fringe meetings, that really the Conservative Party do put 2.5% growth of primary importance to those other Conservative predilections, policies, preferences.
That's interesting, actually, isn't it? Because, look, this is a government that's all about going for growth. And yet the two things that you've been talking about there, immigration and planning reform as well, I mean, they are, in particular, things that is quite difficult for the Conservatives to push through. Do you think there might be a bit of opposition to that?
Yes, I think there might be. And look, those are probably the two things that come up most with businesses around the country in terms of what do we need to drive growth. Everybody is short of labour and skills, and everybody is trying to get projects moving in a country that's hard to get them moving. Now, full credit to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister for putting that in their plan, and I think we'll all be wanting to see that they really mean what they say.
What is your sense on that? You know, because the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has talked about driving immigration, controlling immigration levels, keeping them down. Have you had any sense from the Prime Minister herself that she is prepared to look at immigration levels?
Well, not yet, other than the Chancellor raised it and said there are going to be proposals coming forward. Look, everybody knows, and we saw this at last Conservative Party conference last year, that we aren't going to have uncontrolled immigration, and there isn't a business in the country that's looking for uncontrolled immigration. But the idea that you can overnight close down the borders and not allow in critical skills that we clearly aren't going to grow in Britain soon, that's just putting growth second, not first. And surely now, after the events of the last week, the lesson is growth comes first, not second.
You obviously believe growth should come first. Many other people would say right now that inflation should come first. They're looking at their household bills and they're deeply concerned. They're looking at what's happening to mortgages and they are frankly terrified about what will happen if they are up for renewal anytime soon. And surely the biggest tax-cutting programme for half a century, isn't that just going to stoke inflation?
Well, I think it raises two risks, doesn't it? The first is it's inflationary, and the second is, and I think this is what the markets were reacting to, that it undermines your ability to bring down debt in the long run. And I think that's right. So you have to look at whether or not these tax cuts are going to drive growth. Now, we don't comment a lot on personal income tax. It's not really our business. I'm not convinced those cuts are going to drive growth.
So just to be crystal clear here, you're talking about the decision to scrap the additional rate of tax for everyone earning over 150,000. You don't think that will really move the dial on growth?
Look, if you ask me for 30 measures that are going to drive up growth, I wouldn't put it in the top 30. Now, the Chancellor may feel differently. He might want to set out why he thinks it's going to stimulate growth. At the same time, clearly reversing employers' national insurance, clearly not putting up corporation tax by 6 points. Those things will be helpful to growth and competitiveness. So, look, I think there's a lot of reasons why the markets find the budget not credible. I think you're alluding to some of them that are right. But I think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister now need to come forward and explain what they've done, why they've done it, why they think it'll work. And at the very least, not row back from some of the commitments that they have made to supply-side reform.
How about spending cuts? Are you concerned about the idea about cutting spending?
Yes, but look, I think when you borrow £600 billion, if you take the 450 of the pandemic, the 150 of the energy crisis, you're trying to bring down debt in the medium term. You're clearly going to have a plan that's going to have a mix of spending cuts, perhaps some tax rises, I would have thought, as well as some growth. Now, the exact balance of that, we are wait to hear what the government's view is, but I'd be surprised if you could keep growing public spending as fast as you can. But you need to be careful, because we all know that after the pandemic, there are critical public services that need to be restored. That's why the medium-term plan is going to be tough work.
Tough work. Is there a fairness argument here as well? I know you obviously speak on behalf of businesses, but businesses employ people, don't they, as well? Is there a fairness argument when you look at what has been not said, or rather not said, about uprating benefits and that personal tax level cut?
Yeah, there is absolutely a fairness argument. I have spoken to businesses all week, and the first thing on their mind was the fairness argument. I don't accept that you have to trade off growth with fairness. I think you should have growth and you should have fair distribution of wealth. And I think that's the economy we should be trying to build. So yes, I'm absolutely, as are most of the businesses I speak to, worried about the cost of living crisis almost above everything.
That's interesting. And what would you like to see happen on that?
Well, look, I think let's wait for the Chancellor to come forward. I'm not going to try and pre-empt what needs to come. We've got ourselves into a difficult position. By the way, we were always going to. I think one of the things the public has to accept is that if we're going to have £450 billion COVID bailout, the government have done a £150 billion energy payout. There weren't going to be any easy choices. So I cut the government some slack for that. But I think they need to restore fiscal credibility, exactly as you say. That's to do with inflation and debt. And they need to follow through this week on some things that aren't very popular in Conservative circles. Those are the reforms that will genuinely get the economy growing.
Do they also need to bring forward forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility? They're not due till the end of November.
Yes, I think that's right. Look, as soon as they can do them, the better. But let's be honest, we need to get them right. And getting them right involves the government suggesting the plans they want to do, the OBR giving them fiscal implications of those plans. It's an iterative process. So I don't want to rush it so that it's done badly. It needs to be done well, but the sooner we see it, I think the more we'll all know where we're headed.
Liz Truss saying this morning that she won't be publishing them any earlier. Do you think that's the right decision?
Look, I think if it takes that long to get a good plan, take that long. What you'll need to do instead, in the interim period, is demonstrate on a daily, weekly basis that you are absolutely committed to growth, that you're concerned about inflation and debt, and whatever the government can do to give the market that reassurance, given that the markets are lending us the money, I think they'll find a way to do that.